This video is entitled Entity Relationship Diagrams, Basic Shapes, and is a companion piece to our core systems analysis and design. This goes along with Chapter 6 or Topic 6 of our semester. I'm Dr. Renaud from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this very brief presentation on the basic shapes you find in an entity relationship diagram. Let's start by just talking about why we want to do an entity relationship diagram. In our use cases and in our data flow diagrams, we have data coming in and out of those. Each of the process in a data flow diagram has data going in and something coming out, data or report or something. And in the use cases, when we do a fully dressed, we saw preconditions and we saw data flowing into the use case and then things flowing out of the use case. What this process does, or what we're doing with entity relationship diagramming, is that we're now taking all of those bits of data, all those things, all those numbers, all those facts, and we're going to draw a diagram that shows the relationship between those facts and how to implement them into a database. Now, a vast majority of business data, a vast majority of data is stored in database software using a relational model, which is what we'll be talking about this week in the entity relationship diagram. There are other ways to store data, but if you go through this process and really understand how to store the data and graphically understand the data, regardless of how you're going to eventually save the data or store the data, this will be very beneficial. There are three general formats: the chin model, and there's another model, but the crow's foot diagram that I'm going to show you is the most common diagram used in industry. And if you understand how to do a crow's foot diagram, you can figure out the others. So let's just start with a crow's foot diagram and the important shapes there are in the crow's foot diagram. Really, there's only one shape, the important shape, the entity, and then there are crow's feet, or the connections between the entities. So let's talk about an entity. An entity represents a table, represents a noun, represents a something in the data, a customer, a course, um, an item, a sale, um, uh, a transaction, a reading from a device. You just, there are just some crazy examples, but things, entities, um, are represented by a rectangle, and there's a bar across the top of the rectangle where we put the name of the entity, and then we list the attributes of the entity, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent video. But attributes of an entity are the facts that we store about the entity. For instance, let's think about a table or an entity called student, and we would put student up here. And what are some attributes that go along with being a student? Well, I think an attribute would be student ID number, last name, first name, home address, school address, social security number, what class you're in. You can see all that kind of information, your email address, your phone numbers. All that information are attributes on the entity. Let's think about a customer. Well, a customer would have a customer number, name, address, ship to, bill to information. Let's think about a transaction. For instance, a sale at the grocery store. Well, that would also be an entity, and it would have store number, date, time, the items that were sold, and all kinds of other stuff that we could think about as data on that entity. So entities. Now, the diagram is called an entity relationship diagram because we have entities and we have relationships. And what we're going to do is we're going to model the connection between entities and relationships. And we take an entity that's related to another entity and draw a line between them, connecting the two entities. So, for instance, a student and a course. A student takes many courses, and a course is taken by many students. So that would be a relationship, and we would draw a line between the two, saying that there's a relationship between those two entities. But we use these little crow's feet, and we call it a crow's foot because that looks like a crow's foot. But we draw these little shapes at both ends of the arrow to define the cardinality of that relationship. How are they related? And there are four shapes you need to know for the crow's feet. And the four shapes are 1 to 0, which looks like a 1 or a 0, a 1 and only 1, which is a 1 and a 1, so it's a 1 and only 1. The relationship here is 0 or more, and you can see by the arrow going this way that it's more and 0 out beside it, so 0 or more, and then 1 or more. So you can read that as 0 or more, 1 and only 1, 0 or many, and 1 or many, or 1 or more. So you need to memorize these four arrowheads. You need to just bring them into your consciousness. You need to just know exactly what they mean. And those are the entity shape, and these four arrowheads make up most of what you'll see in most entity relationship diagrams. So here I draw a very, very simple entity relationship diagram. Basically, I have two entities, an entity called A and an entity called B. A and B have a relationship, and often we'll put a name on the relationship. So the relationship isn't named name, but the relationship will often have a name on it, so that it makes it easier for us to see what the relationship is. And you can see the arrows on the crow's feet on the end. Now, to read the diagram, you start at the entity. Entity has 0, so A has 0 or more B's. So you can read it as A has 0 or more B's, and you read it back the other way. B has 1 and only 1 A. So you read the end of the arrow, not the start of the arrow. So that's A has 0 or more B's related to it, and B has 1 and only 1 A related back to it. The ends matter, and the order of the ends matter tremendously when you're drawing an entity relationship diagram. So pay attention to the arrows and read it this way. Entity A has 0 or more entity B's, and entity B has 1 and only 1 entity A. This concludes the really brief introduction to data flow or entity relationship diagram shapes. This video is copyright 2020 by James M. Renault, PhD. All rights are reserved. And I'd like to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in a future video.